Good afternoon. On behalf of the Departments of Education and Health and Human Services, it is our pleasure to welcome you to today's webinar, which is the 5th webinar in a 5-part series that addresses the foster care provisions of the Every Student Succeeds Act, or ESSA. Today's webinar focuses specifically on strategies that education and child welfare agencies can implement to effectively collaborate to ensure educational stability for children in foster care. My name is Stevie Steiness, and I serve as Chief Deputy in the Administration on Children, Youth, and Families within the U.S. Department of Health and Human Services. I am joined by Mary Mislevich, a Casey Fellow at the U.S. Department of Education's Office of Innovation and Improvement. We will also be hearing today from Kathleen McNaught from the ABA Legal Center for Foster Care and Education, as well as several colleagues from the great state of Texas. We are delighted to be joined by Jamie Bernstein, Judge Robert Hoffman, Kelly Kravitz, and Jenny Hinson. As we did with previous webinars in this series, we'll begin today's presentation by providing a high-level overview of the federal framework for ensuring the educational stability for children in foster care. We'll then turn it over to Kathleen McNaught, who will highlight key components of a successful collaboration between child welfare and educational agencies. Next, we'll hear from our partners in Texas, who will share with us some promising practices related to cross-agency collaboration. Finally, and if we have time remaining, we'll conclude by engaging in Q&A with our panelists. This next slide provides a timeline of the evolution of the Educational Stability Framework for Children in Foster Care. The first point on this timeline references the Fostering Connections Act of 2008, which was the first federal step towards supporting school stability for children in foster care. Fostering Connections is notable in that it requires child welfare agencies to collaborate with education agencies to ensure the educational stability of children in foster care. The next point references the December 2015 enactment of the Every Student Succeeds Act. ESSA builds on Fostering Connections and institutes complementary collaboration requirements for education agencies. Considered together, these two laws make clear that the educational stability of children in foster care is a joint responsibility of both agencies. The final 3 points in this timeline highlight our efforts to assist education and child welfare agencies implement the educational stability provisions of ESSA by December of this year, 2016. Turning now to some key ESSA provisions that will be instrumental in improving the educational outcomes for youth in foster care. ESSA requires SEAs to provide assurances that children in foster care remain in their schools of origin unless it is determined that it is not in his or her best interest to do so. If it is determined that a child should not remain in his or her school of origin, a child should be immediately enrolled in their new school, even if he or she does not have the required documents for enrollment. ESSA requires each state education agency to designate a point of contact for child welfare agencies. The SEA point of contact is responsible for overseeing the implementation of the educational stability provisions in ESSA. ESSA also requires local education agencies, or LEAs, to establish points of contact for local child welfare agencies if the corresponding child welfare agency notifies the LEA in writing that it has designated a point of contact. To that end, we have included a template letter in the joint guidance that child welfare agencies may use to provide sufficient written notice to LEAs of POC designations. Over the course of this webinar series, we have been repeatedly asked whether child welfare agencies may notify LEAs of their designated point of contact via email. And the answer to that question is yes. Email notification for a child welfare agency, email notification from a child welfare agency will trigger the requirement in ESSA for LEAs to establish a point of contact. Finally, ESSA requires LEAs to provide assurances that they will collaborate with state or local child welfare agencies to develop and implement written procedures that outline how transportation to school will be provided, arranged, and funded for the duration of a child's time in foster care. It's also important to note here that ESSA amends the MCKINNEY-VENTO Act. It removes from the definition of homeless children and youth those children who are awaiting foster care placement. For all non-covered states, this change is effective December 10, 2016. For covered states, which include states that define awaiting foster care placement in state statutes, this change is effective December 10, 2017. After the effective date, children who previously met the definition of homeless based solely on their status as awaiting foster care placement will no longer be eligible for McKinney-Vento services. These children will, however, be covered by ESSA, as SEAs and LEAs must meet the ESSA educational stability requirements for all children in foster care, including those awaiting foster care placement by December 10, 2016. Of note, children who continue to meet the revised definition of homeless, for example, youth who are living in transitional shelters, motels, or are doubled up, will remain eligible for McKinney-Vento services regardless of their foster care status. We recognize that the changes to McKinney-Vento are significant and nuanced. If you have specific questions about these changes, we encourage you to review the guidance that ED released last month on the Education for Homeless Children and Youth program, a link for which is on this slide, and or to reach out directly to the Department of Education using the contact information that we share at the end of this webinar. On June 23rd, HHS and ED released joint guidance that builds upon and adds clarity to the statutory framework on educational stability set forth in ESSA. The guidance addresses in detail all of the topics listed on this slide and also provides examples of promising practices that states and districts have implemented following the passage of Fostering Connections in 2008. Finally, as I mentioned earlier, today's webinar is the fifth in a five-part series aimed at helping the field implement the educational stability provisions of ESSA. This slide includes links to the recordings and slide decks for prior webinars, and we encourage you to review them at your convenience. Recordings and other materials from each of these webinars will eventually be housed on ED's ESSA Resources webpage. We've included a link to that site at the end of this presentation, and we encourage you to continue checking the page over the next few weeks to access these documents as they are finalized. I'm now going to pass it over to my colleague from the Department of Education, Mary Mislevich, who will address in more detail the topic of today's webinar, effective collaboration. Mary?
Thank you so much, Stevie. Good afternoon, everyone, and thanks for joining us today. So the reason that we decided to include collaboration as a webinar topic and to save it for the last webinar in our series, even though it's a shorter section in the guidance, is that we believe that effective collaboration across the two systems is foundational and essential to achieving school stability for children in foster care. The ESSA statutory requirements were written in the spirit of collaboration, and collaboration is woven into all of the different provisions, from developing transportation procedures to making best interest determinations and creating integrated data systems. Providing education stability is a joint responsibility of both agencies, and full implementation of the requirements in both Fostering Connections and ESSA can only happen if the two agencies are working together. As you know, Fostering Connections already require child welfare agencies to collaborate with education agencies to ensure school stability. So we acknowledge that many of the states already have strong collaborative structures in place, even predating Fostering Connections, and have certainly expanded and improved since then, and that many have already begun their conversations about the implementation of ESSA. And we also know there are some other states that aren't as far along and are more in the developing stages of this work. So we hope that this next hour provides some valuable information for you as we hear from the experts about what it takes, what to take into consideration when setting up these types of collaborations, and also to hear more in depth from one state about how they were able to establish and maintain a collaborative effort over the long term. So before we move on to our presenters, I'm going to briefly review the statutory requirements in ESSA regarding collaboration. So under ESSA, each state plan shall describe the steps an SCA will take to ensure collaboration with the state child welfare agency to ensure the education stability of children in foster care. Each LEA shall provide assurances that the LEA will collaborate with the state or local child welfare agency to designate a point of contact and to develop and implement clear written transportation procedures. So there is collaboration written into both the state level and local level work. So moving on to the guidance, there is a short section on collaboration in the guidance which offers some suggestions about how to get started on establishing a collaboration and some of the important pieces to consider as you move forward. So given that the LEAs and child welfare agencies are going to need to work with multiple partners across districts and state lines, we encourage the creation of regional, inter-district, or interstate collaborations so that the new policies and procedures can be implemented uniformly across the region to ensure consistency. Next, it will be important to provide trainings for both child welfare and education staff on the importance of education stability and on the complex educational needs of foster youth, including the impact of trauma on a child's ability to learn. Other possible areas for training include background information on the child welfare system for education staff, and also training on ESSA requirements for child welfare staff. The guidance encourages including a variety of people and perspectives in the collaboration, including representatives from the courts, community providers, peer mentor groups, and others. And we're going to be hearing more from our presenters about who they included in a bit. Finally, we realize that the focus right now is on the implementation of the ESSA requirements given the December 10th timeline, but we encourage states to use this collaboration to continuously work together to improve outcomes for our most vulnerable population of students, and that this collaboration is ongoing. So with that, I am pleased to introduce our first presenter, Kathleen McNaught, who will be talking to us about the essential components to take into consideration when developing a collaboration. Kathleen McNaught is the Assistant Staff Director of Child Welfare at the American Bar Association Center on Children and the Law. She provides training and technical assistance around the country on a variety of legal child welfare issues, in particular issues related to the educational needs of children in foster care. She's the Project Director for the Legal Center for Foster Care and Education, a collaboration between the ABA and the Juvenile Law Center and Education Law Center. She's worked with states on establishing collaborations over the years, so she has lots of lessons to share with us. I'll pass it over to you now, Kathy.
Thank you, Mary, and good morning or good afternoon to everyone. As Mary said, and as the name of our project indicates, the Legal Center for Foster Care and Education, we have worked in many, many states and local jurisdictions over the last decade trying to improve educational outcomes and to support collaboration in those sites all over the country. And we have seen some really important common themes that are key to successful collaboration. As Mary pointed out, while ESSA is specifically requiring collaboration on some specific set provisions within the law, we have many examples of collaboration around the country that have gone well beyond just those school stability and ESSA requirements. And in fact, you'll hear from one such collaboration, our co-presenters from Texas, in a few minutes. I wanted to say that I think that our comments today are guided to you whether you fall in one or the other of these categories. And the first being a jurisdiction, whether you're at the state or local level, where you do have an established collaborative or a relationship or some kind of a vehicle to have those interagency conversations. So the infrastructure to implement ESSA is already in place. And so that's a great place to be. I think there you are well positioned to review what ESSA requires, aligning it with fostering connections, and to move forward with the pieces of the law that need to be put in place, particularly by that December 10th deadline. I want to encourage those of you that are in states or jurisdictions where perhaps you have not historically or not currently have those kind of collaborative conversations going, that this can be, and ESSA implementation can be the catalyst to start those collaborative conversations. And so there are some basic steps, I think, that are important to take, and we can walk you through those now. So I think first, a very important threshold piece is who needs to be part of this collaborative process. And I think that Mary highlighted some key language from the guidance that talked about including other individuals or other entities that might be important players in that collaborative. And that is certainly what we have found in the jurisdictions that are collaborating successfully. Obviously, this collaboration is across child welfare and education agencies, but some of the most successful collaboratives also have key representatives from the judiciary, from your courts, and also family engagement is a piece of the collaborative, as well as a strong youth voice, and that is true at both the state and local level. Even within the agencies themselves, I think it's important when you're thinking about who needs to be at the table in these collaborative conversations. While we certainly need leadership buy-in, and so the leaders of the agencies, it's also important to think about the key personnel within each agency who will actually be doing the work. So, for example, if you're talking about developing transportation procedures, being sure that the LEA has someone from their transportation unit present when those key conversations are taking place. The next piece that I think is a common theme is really making sure there's been the work done to have a common knowledge base in each of the agencies, each of the entities that are part of the collaboration. So in short, everyone needs to have done their homework before coming to the collaborative table. So first, it's looking within your own agency, understand what policies, practices, programs you currently have, and how they can achieve educational success and improvements for kids. But also trying to have a clear identification of where those gaps are and where there's areas for improvement. I think it is not just doing your homework about your own agency, it's learning as much as you can about the other agencies you're collaborating with. So trying to educate yourselves before coming to a collaborative table about the school system you're collaborating with, for example. What do you know? Or being organized about what questions you might have when you ultimately sit down for conversations and talks. I think it's also important individually to think about what your agency's individual goals and priorities are and to have those in mind before you come to that table. Next, I think, what do you do when you have everyone together? And I think one of the key pieces is really to work out collectively what the obstacles are, what the challenges are, and try to identify together what there might be some opportunities to move the work forward. While for those of you that are new to collaboration and tackling these ESSA provisions in particular, I think it really takes a collaborative conversation of looking at what the language of the law, looking at the wording and the additional support you can have from the guidance, and really mapping it out where there needs to be action on your part. So if you're a state level collaborative, thinking about what kind of state level guidance might be needed to make sure that all of the LEAs and local child welfare agencies know what they need to implement this on the ground. If you're a local collaborative, really looking to see who else needs to be part of it. Is there any guidance at the state that needs to be taken into account? And then I think it's about developing a clear action plan, but being able to set those priorities. For those of you who are well involved in established collaboratives, you know that priority setting is the key. Everyone can identify a lot of things that need to happen and be in place to move forward, but it's really about saying what are going to be those initial priority areas that we're going to work on in order to focus everyone's attention collectively on those particular activities. Track and measuring progress is going to be really critical, and using that data tracking and the measurement of how successful your efforts have been is going to be key to going back and revising perhaps the goal or your priorities of what needs to take place. I think, again, for some very key tips for success in thinking of this in an ESSA implementation context, start simple. I think one of the very first pieces that I know many jurisdictions have tackled is this identification of a point of contact. I don't mean to say it's simple, but I think it's clear what needs to happen is figuring out who in your state agency and your local agency is going to serve in that role and sharing that information with the people that need to hear it. Start small. If you haven't collaborated before, focus first on these ESSA provisions and then think about how to expand your collaborative efforts once the ESSA pieces are in place. While I'm saying start small, you also can't avoid the biggest obstacles, so be very strategic about how to tackle them and address them. One of the ones that we hear very often mentioned is this transportation piece. So it's not something that you can avoid, but really being strategic about how to address it, when in your conversations to put it on your agenda, and how to come to the table with all agencies prepared to be clear in what their resources they can bring. Finally, once you've worked out your goals and you have a plan and you're working forward, the other thing that we hear from so many collaboratives is how do you keep it up? Now we've got a strong relationship. Now we're working and we're meeting regularly. How do we keep everybody's energy and attention on these efforts? We've all, I'm sure, been part of collaborations that are new and exciting, but how do you keep that excitement 2 years, 3 years down the road? And I'm here to tell you that a lot of the successful jurisdictions who are really doing a good job of addressing education have been at this for multiple years. And so it is a key effort that demands resources and attention. So here are a few things that I like to keep in mind that ESSA actually helps in terms of this emphasis on momentum. First is staff resources. This new requirement to identify points of contact in the various agencies, both within child welfare as well as education agencies, is really key to have that internal person, that internal champion within your agency that's going to help keep some energy to your effort and to keep focus when there's multiple competing interests. Celebrating victories, I think this is a very important one to realize and to acknowledge, and really championing the victories in the other agency. Being each other's cheerleaders when things are going well is a great way to build that relationship and keep up spirits. Keeping your agency leadership engaged throughout a process is very key, and as many of you are well aware, often we have leadership changes, and so it's perhaps the leader of your agency that was the biggest champion of your education collaborative has left, and now there's some new leadership who might not even be aware of all of the weeks, months, even years of efforts that have gone into the existing education effort. And so making sure you have ways to loop in new leaders, but also keep leadership engaged as work evolves. Data drives these changes, and so many of the collaboratives we've worked with, data is the reason the collaborative has gotten off the ground. It also can be the key driver to maintaining that momentum. And so making sure there is a data plan written into your collaborative, that you are constantly gathering information, tracking data over time to measure your progress. Two final points is that we have to memorialize the changes and the collaborations to make sure they are maintained. For those of you who have led a lot of these collaboratives, you might not be with your agencies forever, and so you really need to have a way that the good work that you've done, the groundwork that you've laid, will live beyond your time within your agency, within this collaborative. And a key component of that, and I heard Mary already mention it, is this concept of ongoing training. We know that in schools and in child welfare agencies, there is constant staff turnover, and so training is not a one-time event. It is not a once-a-year event. It is an ongoing event that has to occur. Our project, the Legal Center for Foster Care and Education, has been putting out information and materials to support your ESSA implementation. I really encourage you to get on our website. We have some tools and some coming soon that are specifically designed to support your collaboration around ESSA implementation, and we really encourage you to take a look at those when you have a chance. I'll conclude my comments with this visual about what collaboration looks like. It says success, but I think it's equally true of what people think collaboration should look like and what it really looks like. And this isn't meant to deter you. It's meant to be a really realistic view. You can have success in your collaborative efforts. You just have to be prepared for it not only always being that clear and perfect line, but I think as our final speakers on this webinar will share with you from a multi-year fantastic collaboration effort that has gone on in Texas is the efforts are really, really worth it. So thank you, and I will turn this over back to Mary to introduce you to our next presenters.
Thank you so much, Kathy. I love that last slide. It's great. So our next team of presenters hail all the way from the great state of Texas. We are so pleased to have so many different systems represented on the team, in particular the courts for the first time in our webinar series. The courts are such an integral partner in this work. We're really excited to have Judge Robert Hoffman joining us today. But before he begins, I'm going to quickly read all of the bios of the Texas presenters so that we can transition smoothly through each of the presentations. And the bios are shortened since we have so many presenters, so they don't even begin to cover all of the accomplishments of our fine presenters. So starting with Judge Hoffman, in December, Judge Hoffman will complete his 20th year of public service for the state of Texas, having served 5 years as Mason County Attorney, 12 years as Judge of the Child Protection Court of the Hill Country, and 3 years as the District Judge of the 452nd Judicial District of Edwards, Kimball, Mason, McCulloch, and Menard counties. As judge, he has presided in over 13,000 dependency hearings and adoptions in 15 Texas counties, and he and his wife are former foster parents. Jamie Bernstein will be presenting after Judge Hoffman. She joined the Supreme Court of Texas Children's Commission as a staff attorney in 2014. Previously, Ms. Bernstein represented children and youth in child welfare and delinquency proceedings in New York. Next, Kelly Kravitz will be presenting. She served as the Foster Care Education and Policy and McKinney-Vento Homeless Education State Coordinator in the Division of Instructional Resources and State Programs at the Texas Education Agency. Ms. Kravitz champions the agency's foster care and homeless education initiatives and leads development and coordination of policy and program activities at TEA. And last but not least, Jenny Hinson is the Division Administrator for Permanency for Texas Child Protective Services. In her role, she is responsible for the development of policy and programs that affect children and youth in the conservatorship of DFPS. Ms. Hinson is a member of the Texas Blueprint Transforming Educational Outcomes for Children and Youth in Foster Care Implementation Task Force, the ECI Advisory Committee, and the State Agency Council. We are so pleased to have all of our presenters today, and I am going to begin by passing this over to Judge Hoffman.
Thank you. Hello, everyone. My name is Rob Hoffman, and I'm the judge of the 452nd Judicial District in the beautiful Hill Country of Texas. We are all so happy to be here with you today to tell you about the good work of so many people across our state to help transform educational outcomes for students in foster care. Let's begin with our conversation discussing our different systems and how we were able to find common ground. In Texas, our child protection system is state administered. While there are 11 child protection regions with regional directors who are responsible for day-to-day operations, policy and practices are all developed at the state level. There are approximately 5,000 caseworkers and over 30,000 children in care in Texas on any given day. Now, while our child welfare system is state administered, our education system is highly decentralized with independent school districts, and I highlight the word independent, with many policies being formulated on the local level. We have over 1,200 independent school districts and open enrollment charter schools. Now, I couldn't show you a map of all these 1,200 school districts, but the map here shows the 20 education regions across the state of Texas. In Texas, there are over 5 million students in those schools. Finally, Texas has an extremely independent, elected, and partisan judiciary with about 100 judges across our state regularly hearing child protection cases and about 500 total judges having jurisdiction over them. In other presentations, I've called this a recipe for disaster, but fortunately that was not our result here in the state of Texas. As you can imagine, the size and scale of our state was a major barrier to our collaboration. Each of our agencies operated really in its own silo, and the systems didn't communicate well, if at all. There was a lack of awareness about the challenges facing the other systems, and responsibility was transferred and generally not shared. You can see here our list of barriers to collaboration, not the least of which was data sharing, as Kathy mentioned earlier. Leading our way in our collaboration was the Supreme Court of Texas Permanent Judicial Commission for Children, Youth, and Families. The Children's Commission had been established by Supreme Court order in Texas in 2007, and it's currently chaired by Texas Supreme Court Justice Eva Guzman. Generally, the Commission administers the Federal Court Improvement Project grant. With the recognition that courts have great oversight role in what happens to children once they enter foster care, the Commission serves as a facilitator to collaborate with state leaders in the executive, judicial, and legislative branches, and also leads initiatives to address the needs of children and youth in foster care. The involvement of the judiciary from the highest level in our state has really been critical to all of our initiatives and to our success. With regards to the Education Committee, the idea for our Education Committee was developed by a Texas team during their presence at the National Judicial Leadership Summit on Child Protection back in October of 2009. The focus of the Education Committee is to improve education outcomes for children and youth in foster care. And it includes a commitment of statewide resources to examine educational outcomes and make recommendations for improvement for outcomes for our children. The membership of our initial Education Committee included over 100 state, regional, and local stakeholders. During that time, we met over an 18-month period. We were organized into 4 subcommittees. Now, geographic diversity is great in Texas, and it's noteworthy that we mentioned that there were folks from across our state, all the way from southeast Texas to far west Texas, 830 miles along Interstate 10 there. We took a holistic approach with the support of a common vision that these children, our foster children, are in fact our children. They're our children, and of course, they're our responsibility. So we asked for accountability from every partner. Kathy mentioned those partners earlier, but I want to mention them again. We have accountability beginning with the judiciary and also with attorneys representing our agency, our children, and our parents. Advocates, including CASA, Child Protective Services, and our schools. This not only includes teachers and principals and administrators, but counselors and those folks working at the front desk, the registrars, local school boards, and especially our foster care liaisons. Also, we have responsibility for our statewide education agency and other state-level education agencies. And finally, we're happy to include post-secondary education institutions as well, and that really represents the next great chapter of our work. So the result of all this hard work over the 18-month period was the publication of the Texas Blueprint, which was released in March of 2012. This document was modeled after the American Bar Association Legal Center for Foster Care and Education Blueprint for Change, with a robust Texas tweak included. This document was not meant to sit on a shelf gathering dust. Really, it's a 2-level report. First of all, it is a roadmap for change for the state of Texas, and Jamie will be talking about that a little bit more in a minute. But lots of recommendations to help us get where we need to go. But secondly, it's also a collaborative tool that can be replicated regionally and even locally. So what does all this mean? All of this work really filters down to practical application on the ground, resulting in positive outcomes for our individual children. And it also means folks from different systems on the local level have the greater ability to solve real-time problems. We're very proud of this document. Now Jamie, who is a staff attorney at the Children's Commission, is going to talk about how we worked to implement the recommendations from the blueprint. Jamie?
Thank you, Judge Hoffman. Again, my name is Jamie Bernstein, and I am a staff attorney at the Supreme Court of Texas Children's Commission. Judge Hoffman just discussed the development of the Texas Blueprint, and I'll now walk you through how this has been implemented in Texas and what we're doing now. The Texas Blueprint contains over 125 recommendations to improve educational outcomes for children and youth in foster care. The recommendations are broken down into the following categories: judicial practices, data collection and information sharing, multidisciplinary training, school readiness, school stability and transitions, school experience, supports and advocacy, and post-secondary education. As Judge Hoffman mentioned, it was really important that the report was actionable. So in 2012, the Supreme Court of Texas created a task force to prioritize recommendations and begin implementation. Over a 2-year period, which we refer to as Phase 1, the work was organized into 3 work groups: data, school stability, and training. Although these are broad topics, they were chosen because they impact all students in foster care. In 2015, the task force issued a final report and found that in Phase 1, about 80% of the Texas Blueprint objectives were either initiated or completed. Kelly and Jenny will discuss the resources developed at the state education and child welfare agencies, and I will now touch on some of our other collaborative accomplishments. Since 2010, there have been many significant new provisions in state law to improve educational outcomes for children in foster care. Here are just a few highlights of the legislative accomplishments resulting from the awareness brought by the Texas Blueprint. Under state law, we have designated points of contact at the SEA, LEAs, our higher education board, and public post-secondary institutions. I want to point out 3 other major changes. First, judicial determinations about education. Judges are now required to assess whether the child's educational needs and goals have been identified and addressed at every statutorily required permanency hearing. Second, every child in foster care has a designated education decision maker. This role was created because schools did not know who to contact for day-to-day issues and major school events. Lastly, the addition of a data indicator code to identify students in foster care at the district level has been a major change for our state. Not only is this important for data collection, but it also triggers compensatory education services and important school nutrition benefits. Here are some examples of our training accomplishments. Texas's first Education Summit was a major turning point in raising awareness across the state. The Education Summit brought together court, education, and child welfare stakeholders for the first time. Everyone was grouped by region, which fostered collaboration with other partners from the same geographic area. The energy and enthusiasm generated by the words of the highest leaders from our judiciary, education, and child welfare agencies, as well as the collaboration of the participants, has driven all our work. Providing high-quality trainings to judges, attorneys, child welfare, special education, school administrator, and other stakeholder groups has been and continues to be a top priority for our state. In 2015, an entire track was developed for Texas foster care liaisons at the National Dropout Prevention Conference in San Antonio. This track also featured cross-system presentations and dialogue. Even if you're unable to hold a statewide summit, creativity and leveraging existing resources will certainly create more opportunities for training and learning. As Kathy mentioned, data informs all our work. In Texas, students are flagged at the campus level, and we also analyze data on the back end through a data match between the Department of Family and Protective Services and the Texas Education Agency. We have designated a baseline school year and plan to track outcomes over time and use data to target improvements. Through this process, we've realized the critical role courts can play in improving educational outcomes. Judges are great conveners, and when a judge calls a meeting, people often show up. We've also found that when judges routinely ask questions about education, everyone else involved in the case tends to follow suit. As a court improvement program, the Children's Commission helps bridge the gap between courts, child welfare, and other systems, in this case, the education system. We also develop resources and send correspondence to judges to keep them apprised of best practices and changes in the law. Although we have accomplished a lot through our collaborative efforts, there's still a lot of work to do. Maintaining momentum and continuing to engage stakeholders across systems remains our focus. With the Texas Blueprint as our guide, we have now entered Phase 2 of implementation, with a standing foster care and education committee. This signals a long-term commitment to addressing the educational needs of children and youth in foster care. Like the Education Committee and the Task Force, this committee membership crosses disciplines and systems. We continue to rely on the expertise of the School Boards Association, CASA, judges, attorneys, district liaisons, child placing agencies, foster care alumni, and many other critical partners. Having this historical knowledge, but also bringing in new voices, helps keep our work current. We continue to emphasize data collection and analysis, training, and resource development. Additionally, we are now focused on supporting collaboration at the local level and working together to strengthen ESSA implementation. We're also expanding our state-level work to address post-secondary education and special education. While organic collaboration is absolutely ideal and encouraged, having a formal structure keeps foster care and education on everyone's radar and provides regular opportunities to keep the work moving forward. Now I'm going to turn it over to Kelly to discuss the efforts at the State Education Agency.
Thank you, Jamie. It is truly an honor to be with all of you today. My name is Kelly Kravitz, and I'm the Foster Care Education and Policy Coordinator at the Texas Education Agency. Also, for the last year and a half, I've served in the McKinney-Vento Homeless Education State Coordinator role, although we know that those roles need to be separated out, which we anticipate will be happening in the future. It is incredible to look back and see how far we've come since beginning this work, and neat to have the opportunity to share some of our efforts and our lessons learned. Specifically, my coordinator role began at the Texas Education Agency 4.5 years ago when TEA, the Department of Family and Protective Services, and the Children's Commission applied for and was awarded an 18-month U.S. Department of Health and Human Services Administration for Children and Families Child Welfare Education Demonstration Grant. The grant focused on collaboration between child welfare and education collaboration, and we are one of 10 sites that was selected. The Texas TRIO project had both a statewide and local collaboration component. Our local collaboration was in Houston ISD with DFPS Region 6. And the grant really allowed us to begin formalizing and operationalizing our collaboration at both the state and the local level. TEA took the lead on coordinating the grant project, and the grant provided the agency the initial capacity to hire a coordinator within the SEA to work with child welfare and build overall capacity within the state's education system to address students in foster care. One major project deliverable was the creation of the Texas Foster Care and Student Success Resource Guide, a comprehensive resource that codified numerous laws, best practices, tips, and tools to equip educators with information on how to best serve students experiencing foster care and also how to coordinate with child welfare. Whether it be a guidebook or some other tool, writing down and making sure that educators and child welfare are aware of the laws, resources, and practices is an important step for states and local communities in doing this work. Following the grant's ending and the completion of the Texas TRIO project, the SEA saw the great value and necessity of the work and made the Foster Care and Policy Coordinator position permanent. It is critically important that states create capacity within their SEA to do the foster care work. Ideally, this is not a task to simply be added to someone's already full plate, but states should thoughtfully plan to designate a full-time position to the foster care coordinator and point of contact role if possible. On the next couple of slides, I'm going to share a bit more about this role and some ideas for implementation and coordination in the SEA regarding ESSA. So the first thing I have here is implementation of numerous education laws. Working to ensure implementation of the numerous laws that are in place to address the education of students in foster care is an important role for the state coordinator. Making sure that the education system at large is aware of all the mandates within your state's education and family code that address and relate to the education of students in foster care is a critical first step in this work. And increasing awareness is very much necessary. Developing tools and resources. In addition to the resource guide, we have provided administrator letters from the agency, information on enrollment. We've also developed a website and a listserv, and we work with the Children's Commission work groups to develop other tools and review materials jointly. A large component of the SEA role is not only the external coordination, but the internal coordination that is required across numerous divisions and programs. Building your internal team is a critical step for ensuring external work with your child welfare stakeholders can be achieved. For example, we work with our curriculum division, who worked with our State Board of Education on proportional credit requirements and expanding the credit by exam window for students in foster care. We work with our data team, we work with legal, and we work with numerous other programs. I can't stress the importance of the foster care coordinator's role in building capacity and creating linkages with a variety of state and federal education programs across the SEA and within local school systems. Lastly, we work very closely with implementation of the Texas Blueprint. We are part of the work groups and all the activities. Input and involvement from a variety of TEA staff, including legal, data, special education, and others, play an important role in informing the work group's activities. Some other avenues and places where we have had SEA leadership. Every school district in Texas and charter school has a designated foster care liaison who's responsible for enrollment and transfers of students in foster care. This position will serve as the designated point of contact for child welfare regarding ESSA, and we provide training and technical assistance for these liaisons. We also maintain and store these liaisons in our Texas Education Directory. So it's very important that you utilize existing systems, processes, and procedures that your agencies have for doing work. It took us about 2 years to build this into our Texas system where we collect information from school districts. So any opportunities that you have to get in front of this within your SEAs and develop systems, leverage existing processes will be very, very helpful for your ESSA implementation. Along with that, leveraging existing processes and systems regarding regional networks or communication networks is also something that you can do right off as you're working on ESSA implementation. For example, we have regional education service centers. We worked with our regional executive directors to designate foster care champions in every education service center region. This was completely voluntary by our ESCs, but these ESC foster care champions are convening local consortiums, providing trainings, and providing information and training for their local school districts. Again, the SEA was able to kind of champion and spearhead that and leverage the local collaborative groups through our education service center regions. Additionally, we have state work groups and meetings. For example, Title I has a committee of practitioners meeting that happens quarterly. We've been able to attend that meeting and provide updates and information regularly. We also have systems in place where we broadcast training across the state through TETN network. Again, making those connections within the agency, leveraging those opportunities to disseminate and get information out is an important role for the SEA coordinator. I would also like to say, piggybacking on what Jamie said about training, there are numerous opportunities to provide trainings through the state. Again, working with your state programs, your federal programs, and making sure that foster care is on the agenda at these state programs is an important role for your coordinator. For the point of contact, again, increasing awareness across the education about students in foster care is critical within our education systems and communities. And lastly, I'd like to share a little bit about ESSA so far and some of the implementation activities that we are working on. We have begun convening stakeholders. We've now had 2 meetings with the Department of Family Protective Services, Children's Commission, and the Texas Association of School Boards. We're working on an FAQ and some other supportive documents that will be shared in collaboration with the guidance the Department of Education and HHS provided. We're also coordinating within the SEA. So it's so important that that coordinator and that champion is speaking up about the ESSA provisions. Again, working with title, legal, data, transportation, being the squeaky wheel across a number of areas in our agency regarding the ESSA provisions. We're also documenting all of our collaborative activities and providing information for the state plan as required per ESSA. Again, I talked about championing across program areas. Your internal champion is going to be the voice regarding ESSA and students in foster care at numerous circles and decision-making tables within your agency. We are working to problem solve and educate. As the December 10th, 2016 timeline is very short, figuring out a plan for how the LEAs will provide assurances that they are implementing the transportation plans and procedures. And lastly, we are and will be working to train and equip at every opportunity, upcoming conferences, putting this information across our listserv and on our website. Again, the State Education Agency has a critical role in getting this information out and equipping the field and taking action regarding these activities. So with that, I wanted to turn it over to Jenny Hinson from the Department of Family Protective Services. Thank you.
Thank you, Kelly. Before I begin talking about the work that we've done here at the Child Welfare Organization, Kelly, I was wondering if you would share with folks how your position came to be and how it's funded. I think that might be helpful for some of the audience participants.
Yeah, absolutely. So my position was funded originally through the grant project, and then after that, the agency pays for it out of its general administration funds.
Thank you so much. Well, good afternoon, everybody. I know that I'm at the very end of this wonderful presentation. Again, my name is Jenny Hinson, and I'm the Division Administrator for Permanency for CPS here in Texas. And many of you might be wondering what permanency and education have to do with one another. These two are very intertwined, well-being and permanency outcomes for children, and education policy and practice sits within my division at the Child Welfare Organization. So I'm very excited to talk to you guys about some of the work that we've been doing to support this collaboration and to talk about some of the lessons that we've learned. And so throughout the years that we've been partnering on this collaborative, we have updated numerous policies and contracts within our organization. Specifically, we tightened up our enrollment timeframes to reduce the amount of time that children could be out of school should they experience a placement disruption. We outlined really what the communication expectations are within our organization and then amongst the educators, our caregivers, our legal parties, our parents, our students, et cetera. We did a lot of work with our providers, our child care providers, specifically our foster parents and other caregivers, and really strengthened the residential contract to ensure that there was clarity around school enrollment, school withdrawal, and participation in the very important meetings that happen during the school year and throughout the summer for our children. We have education specialists located in all of our regions. So previously in the webinar, Judge Hoffman showed the map of the two regions for Texas. And so we have one education specialist for each of our regions within Texas. And these are individuals I'm going to talk about in a moment, but they are really our subject matter experts and are there to provide support not only to our children, but also to our caseworkers and to our communities when navigating these two systems. We have an education decision maker form. This was referenced earlier by Jamie. And so whenever a child comes into conservatorship, which is our legal term for whenever we are the legal parents, we identify who the education decision maker is. And so there is a form that is executed anytime that designation changes. We file it with the court at the beginning of our cases, and then we make sure that the schools have a copy, the parents have a copy, all of the legal parties have a copy, and that the education decision maker does. What is unique and interesting about this form is that it not only identifies who that person is and their contact information, but we spend a lot of time identifying the roles, responsibilities, and expectations for what that person is supposed to do in order to ensure that both educators and the education decision makers were clear about that. We have internal websites for our staff where we host a variety of information. We've created a lot of at-a-glance best practices that can be used for internal trainings. We have back-to-school newsletters that we send out reminding folks of the importance of getting kids in school and making sure that if there is a change in school, all of the transfer information happens. We send out regularly communication to all of our kinship caregivers and to our foster parents, notifying them of any changes with regard to state or federal law and really best practices around the beginning of the school year and the end of the school year. And most recently, we've begun developing local education consortiums. And so we've done a lot of work on the state level. You've heard that throughout the presentation today. But what we really recognized is that on a state level, you can build as much infrastructure and support, but unless the work really happens at the local level, then you're not going to make the strides that you're hoping to make. And so we have, through partnership with the local school districts, our education specialists are developing local consortiums where they look at the local data, they discuss what strategies would be most effective for that particular community, and then they come together to develop strategies and solutions in order to improve outcomes for those children. Our education specialists participate in our more complicated ARDs. They help with the development of IEPs. They attend transition planning meetings. Over half of them have teaching experience and have master's degrees in education. But as I mentioned, they are our primary points of contact for our schools and the primary resources for our staff. Moving along, we have a very strong partnership here in Texas with CASA. I hope you all are familiar with that organization. If not, I would suggest that you take a moment to check them out. They are the voice for children when they're in conservatorship, and so they often play the role of educational advocates for these children. And so in partnership with us, the courts, TEA, and many others, we developed this educational toolkit, which sits on their website and provides really great information and resources to help advocate for this important population. One of our big accomplishments here in Texas is our foster care and education data infographic. We've got some screenshots of it up here, but we really created this to generate some excitement, some curiosity, and hopefully some momentum. It really gives you an at-a-glance as to the demographics of this particular population, the outcomes, some of the challenges that these children have, and then some specific questions that each party in the circle can consider when deciding, you know, how they want to intervene and what strategies that they might want to use. And so as I close, I would just like to say that we've learned a lot of lessons in the 6+ years that we've been working together here in Texas. And really the big takeaways are communication is essential. You know, sometimes it can be hard to really trust another organization when you feel like you have such important confidential information that you're charged with ensuring nobody has. But all of us are in that same situation. We're all charged with making sure that we have good outcomes for these children. We need to come to the table, talk very openly about what our worries are, really come with a solution-focused attitude, develop some common language. We spend a lot of time talking about the same thing but using very different words. And, you know, really taking the opportunity to hear not only what the professional community has to say, but also making sure that we have our youth and our foster alum involved so that they can really remind us of what it's like to be caught in these two systems and how their teachers were often the ones that helped them make it through. And so I'd like to turn it back over to Mary.
Thanks so much, Jenny, and thank you to the whole Texas team for that very robust presentation. You are all doing great work out there in Texas. Unfortunately, as you can see, we're at time, so we're not going to have time for questions today. We tried to weave the questions into the presentation as they came in, so hopefully you had your questions answered. But if not, and if you have any additional questions for our presenters, please email them directly at the email address that's on the title slide for their presentation. And thank you to everyone on the webinar for joining us today. We hope that you have found the entire webinar series valuable and informative. I know that many of you have participated in multiple webinars. We really appreciate that you're taking the time to learn more about this important new legislation and prioritizing the ESSA provisions. We know they're going to make a really positive impact for children in foster care. And this is certainly not the end of the Department of Education and HHS's support for you. all of the hard work of implementation is still ahead of us, we know. So please continue to direct any questions that you have to the ESSA mailbox. This is for SEAs and LEAs. And feel free to reach out to your Office of State Support Program Officer if you have more state-specific or tribal-specific questions. For our child welfare partners, please continue to reach out to your Center for State Liaison through the Capacity Building Center for States. And we will be sure to be in touch about any other future technical assistance opportunities or any learning opportunities. We'll share that with you through the emails that you have provided to us. So with that, thank you again. Thank you to all of our presenters, and have a wonderful day.